So I know this is late, but as a booktuber, I'm legally obligated to do one of these at least once a year. So sorry about that. What's up, readers? I'm Adam, aka a dude who reads, and today I'm going to go through my top 10 books of 2023. And in case this is the first time you watch one of these videos, I just want to clarify these are the top 10 books that I read in 2023, not the top 10 books that were published in 2023, because I didn't read all the books that were published in 2023. In fact, I'm not sure I read a single book that was published in 2023. That's just how I roll. So, I'm not going to get into too much more of a preamble. I'm just going to jump right into it, starting with a couple of honorable mentions. So, there's 10 books in this list, 2 honorable mentions, and I felt like I needed to include a couple honorable mentions because while these books didn't make it into the top 10, they definitely bear mentioning in the books that I read this year, starting with the Epic of Gilgamesh. So I did an entire video on the Epic of Gilgamesh and why you should read this. So the book that is 35 book, it wasn't a book. It's an epic poem. It's about 3,500 years old. Themes that still resonate today. Great story. Incredible how everything that we can think of as literature can trace its roots back to things that are mentioned in this book, myths from Mesopotamia. Absolutely fascinating read. Why didn't it make the top 10? Quite simply because the Epic of Gilgamesh isn't a full work. It's maybe 75% of an entire work. The other 25% is lost to time. And so when you read it, it's really more of an exercise in studying your history or your literary history, and not so much a full read of a book. And so I didn't feel quite right putting it in my top 10, but I still think it's definitely something that the majority of readers should check out. The second book in my honorable mentions is going to be a graphic novel. So anyone who's watched my channel before knows that I love including graphic novels in my top 10s for a few reasons. One is that I'm a big fan of literature as well as the visual arts. And graphic novels do a great job of combining those two passions of mine. The other reason that I like to include graphic novels in my lists is because, frankly, I get a little bit of a kick out of seeing the comments from pretentious snobs who freak out when they see comics put aside serious literary works in any kind of video. So I get a little bit of a kick out of it. That being said, there were no graphic novels that I read this year that really were good enough to penetrate into my top 10 list, but there is one that I did want to mention, and that is the Nice House on the Lake Volume 2, which in and of itself, really good book, really interesting, great horror story, great characters, great visuals, but just kind of fell short of that top 10. The reason I wanted to mention it, though, is because if I pair it with The Nice House on the Lake Volume 1, which I actually read last year, you combine these two books together into a single story, and these are an absolutely fantastic horror story that is, in and of itself, in these 2 volumes, a complete story. I think there may or may not be plans to continue the story beyond this, but you don't have to go beyond these 2 volumes. These 2 books together make for probably one of the best horror stories that I have ever read in any medium. So definitely worth a look. And again, the only reason that this is not in the top 10 is because Volume 2 by itself was good, not fantastic. Volume 1 was absolutely incredible, but when you put the 2 together, you have a really good piece of work. So that's it for my honorable mentions, and now we are going to jump straight into the top 10 list. And as usual with my top 10 lists, you will see that this is a really eclectic list, bouncing around from fantasy to science fiction to classic literature to nonfiction. So there's going to be a little bit of everything on here, starting with book number 10, and that is Terry Pratchett's Sorcery. I'm pronouncing this sorcery because S-O-U-R-C-E is source, and that to me is sorcery. I don't know if other people pronounce it sourcery, like sour. Regardless, the book is Sorcery by Terry Pratchett. It is the 5th book in the Discworld series. It is the 3rd book in the Wizards sub-series within Discworld, if you will. The protagonist, Rincewind, has appeared in 2 previous books. And so Discworld is a series that I am rereading from start to finish in order of publication, and so far I have really enjoyed my rereads. Sorcery is the last of the books that I read this year, so book 5 in the series, so obviously this will go for a little while. And The reason this is making my top 10 list, and this is the only Discworld book on this list, so a little bit of a spoiler alert. The reason this made it into my top 10 and not any other books that I've read so far in the Discworld series, because generally speaking, most people will not put the Wizards books as their favorite Pratchett novels. Usually they'll be more the Guards series of books, or maybe the Death series of books, but you don't hear too many people naming any of the Wizards books as their favorites. And in fact, I don't think I've ever heard anyone call Sorcery their favorite Pratchett book. The reason I'm going with Sorcery as my representation for Terry Pratchett in this list is because as I've read every book in the order in which they've published, I've seen Pratchett's writing evolve and get better, and so the latest book I've read in the series is just the best book in terms of Pratchett's writing. Even if you go back to The Color of Magic, the first book in the series, Pratchett's humor is on point, which I really enjoyed, and the way he sort of weaves themes into his writing has always kind of been there throughout. But Sorcery to me is sort of the best complete story, narrative arc, and you even have sort of a little evolution of the protagonist in this story as well. And when you combine that with Pratchett's signature wit, and just sort of the magic that is the Discworld universe, I think Sorcery is a really great read, and I do think that the Wizards novels do sort of get short shrift. And I think the reason that happens is because if you think of it, there are I think in total 5 or 6 Wizards novels. This is the third one, and it is the 5th book in the Discworld series total, which means all of the Wizards novels that are written tend to be very early on in the Discworld series, so they're earlier in Pratchett's writing career. So if he continues to get better as his career evolves, as most writers tend to do, then it's only normal that his later books would be better than his earlier books. And as a result, I think we end up giving the Wizards books a little bit short shrift, but I definitely really enjoyed this, and it was my favorite of the 5 Pratchett novels I read this year. Moving right along to book number 9, and this is going to be a very big change of pace, and that is a nonfiction instructional book, really, On Writing Well by William Zinsser. So this book is a book that teaches you how to write mainly nonfiction, and because I teach students how to write mainly nonfiction, it is an excellent book as far as I'm concerned, and one of the Bibles in terms of how to write nonfiction well. Not only that, not only is the advice in this book super solid about how to write clearly, how to get your point across, how to avoid certain pitfalls that many less experienced writers fall into, it's written in such a humorous and entertaining fashion that you can read through this entire book even if you have no desire to become a professional writer, and just enjoy the book itself. That's how well written this book is. And so I guess it's no surprise that a book that is this well written would do a good job of teaching you how to write well. So On Writing Well by William Zinsser, highly recommended if you are in the market for a book about how to improve your writing. Speeding right along, the next 2 books here I don't have physical copies of because I got them from different places. So number 8 on my list is Persepolis Rising by James S.A. Corey. This is book, I want to say, 8 in the Expanse series. And so the Expanse series of novels is a series that I read almost in its entirety this past year. I think only Leviathan Wakes, the first book in the series, I read last year. Every other book I read this year. And I really, really enjoyed this science fiction series. I got into it because of the TV show. I'm not ashamed to admit the TV show is phenomenal. The books are just as good. I won't go as far as saying they're better because I have a whole video comparing the books to the TV show if you're curious about that. I knew as I was reading through this series that some book in this series was going to make my top 10 list for 2023. The hardest thing that I had to do was figure out, of the 9 books in the Expanse series, which one was going to make my top 10. And in the end, I landed on Persepolis Rising, but it was a really tough call. There's so many great things about the Expanse series. The characters are phenomenal. The story is so well crafted that it holds its own through 9 enormous books as one continuous narrative, but each and every single book stands on its own as a really good read of its own. I chose Persepolis Rising. I can't talk too much about why I chose it without spoiling the series, but let me just say, and this won't spoil anything, Persepolis Rising to me is kind of the Empire Strikes Back of the Expanse series of novels. So that gives you an idea of kind of it's a key turning point in the overall story. It sets up the finale. It's booked, like I said, 8 out of 9, I think, and it's just gives you a new perspective. The other thing that I love about this book is it gets you into the mindset of antagonists who are not just sort of cartoonish evil characters, and so you get a really great view of antagonists with their own motivation, which, while you may not agree with them, you can at least understand where they're coming from, and that makes them that much more real, and it makes the story that much stronger, because now your protagonist has to not only overcome the antagonist, but also has to struggle with this kind of question of, is this actually something that we should be trying to overcome? Because there is a world where the logic behind this does sort of make sense. And so you can kind of make those decisions on your own, and it adds an extra layer of thinking. So Persepolis Rising by James S.A. Corey, book number 8 in my top 10 list for 2023. Moving along to book number 7 in this list. Again, a book that I don't have a physical copy of because I took this one out of the library and just sort of on a whim, and was just pleasantly surprised by how good it was, and that is Troy by Stephen Fry. And so I recently talked about this in my fall reading rundown, how I read Heroes and Troy, which are books 2 and 3 in Stephen Fry's sort of 3-book series about Greek mythology, Mythos being book 1. I just recently finished Mythos as well. Troy, the third of the 3 books, is the one that I'm picking to represent this trilogy here, because Troy sort of tells the story that we know in terms of the Battle of Troy from the Iliad, but starts earlier, ends later, and so you get sort of a whole view of what the entire Battle of Troy is all about, retold with the wit and beautiful storytelling voice of Stephen Fry. And so this book, to me, was just such an enjoyable read. I've read a lot of ancient literature, a lot of mythology this year, and in previous years. I'm a sucker for anything relating to ancient Greece. And this was just one of the best retellings of ancient Greek mythology I have ever read, and is just an absolutely fantastic read that I would recommend to anyone, whether you are a fan of Greek mythology or you have never read any Greek mythology at all, you don't even know any of the Greek gods aside from Zeus. Still a great read, super entertaining, super fun. You'll learn a bunch of stuff, but more importantly, you'll just have a great time reading this book. And that brings me to the next book, which is going to be a little bit less fun as far as reads go, but a great book nonetheless, and that is A Man Called Uwe by Frederick Bachmann. And so this is my first ever Bachmann novel that I've read, and A Man Called Uwe is one of those books that, depending on what you have lived through in your life, you will react to this book differently. So A Man Called Uwe is the story of a man who is kind of in his twilight years, famous, is a curmudgeon, and he kind of has to learn how to live again. And so this book is about loss. It's about how we deal with loss. It's about family. It's about creating a family. And like I said, depending on your own personal experience, some of the moments in this book will hit you harder than others. I do believe that if you have experienced a significant amount of loss in your life, you will appreciate this book all the more. However, I do almost promise you that it will make you cry. I cried a bunch of times reading this book, to the point where my wife had to ask me if I was okay. But it is a beautifully written book. If this book doesn't land as well with you, then in some ways I'm actually happy for you, because it probably means that it's not connecting with something that you have lived yourself. And that's okay. It is still a beautifully written book. It is at times funny. It is, like I said, at times heartbreaking. But, to take a book that was originally written in Swedish, have it translated into English, and still have it keep such a strong emotional impact, I think says a lot. And I know I'm not surprising anyone or I'm not introducing anyone to Bachman. He's been around for a while. And I think A Man Called Uva actually just got turned into a movie starring Tom Hanks. So yeah, he's pretty mainstream, and I'm a little bit late to the party, but I was really blown away by A Man Called Uva, and I think that if you're the type of person who likes to feel things when they're reading, definitely worth checking out. Moving right along to a few more books which I don't have physical copies of, but still worth mentioning. Number 5 on my list of top 10 is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. So Andy Weir of The Martian fame. Andy Weir followed up The Martian with another book, I think it was Artemis, which I never heard all that much about. And then Project Hail Mary was the most recent release, and Project Hail Mary has gotten quite a bit of critical praise, and I picked it up kind of on a whim. Wasn't expecting too much. I didn't read any of Andy Weir's previous stuff, but I knew enough about it to say that maybe I'd like it, maybe I wouldn't. I was a little bit concerned that it would be a little bit dry, not all that interesting. It's hard science fiction, meaning that it is science fiction, but the science is based in reality and real science. So unlike soft science fiction, like something like Star Trek, where the science is based on not really science. It's more it's so far advanced it might as well be modern magic. Hard science fiction is based on what current science tells us is possible, and then kind of projects that into the near future and tells stories about how that could potentially evolve. Project Hail Mary, without spoiling it, is essentially the story of how a teacher manages to get selected to go out into space to save the human race. And Weir does a really great job of telling the story, because it could be something that could be done in a way that feels kind of stale and old, because this is not a new idea, but the way it's done is really interesting, especially the use of sort of the character slowly returning memories about how he got to where he is. Again, something that could be done in a cheesy way is not at all. And you would think, again, that a story about a guy who's off in space pretty much by himself wouldn't be all that emotional. But again, this is a story that, contrary to what I expected, moved me to tears in some instances. So a beautifully written story that really surprised me, came out of left field. I don't know if the rest of Andy Weir's writing is this good, but if it is, I definitely need to check it out, because I was really blown away by Project Hail Mary. Next up on the list is a book that I have talked a lot about in a lot of other areas, and so I'm going to be really brief about this. Number 4 on my list is Dead House Gates by Steven Erikson. I did an entire reading vlog on Dead House Gates. I did a reading vlog on Gardens of the Moon, which is the first book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. I will be doing reading vlogs for all of the books in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. So rather than say too much about it, I will just say it has been a revelation to me to not find because I always knew it was there, but to finally read Erikson's writing, and I can honestly say Erikson has quickly become one of my favorite fantasy authors. I won't say any more. If you're interested in knowing more about the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, I will link to the playlist containing all of my reading vlogs about those books in the video. So that moves me on to book number 3. Again, this is a book I read on Kindle, and so I don't have a physical copy with me. But that book is Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. So Joe Abercrombie, probably my favorite fantasy author, period, of all time. Maybe contentious, maybe not. But I, this year, read the standalone novels in the First Law world. So First Law is the world in which Joe Abercrombie has done the majority of his writing. His original First Law trilogy is what most people know him for. The amazing character work that he's done in there, and his sort of unique style has enamored him to fantasy fans all over the place. After the initial trilogy, Joe Abercrombie released 3 standalone novels, Best Served Cold, The Heroes, and Red Country. Of those 3 standalone novels, which I read this year, Best Served Cold is, to me, my favorite. It is a great story about revenge, the cost of revenge, Again, Abercrombie does a phenomenal job exploring characters. I think Best Served Cold is just a perfect fantasy novel in so many ways. You've got great character explanations. You've got excellent action sequences if you're in for that. You actually have a story that is compelling and interesting and that moves relatively quickly, which was is often the criticism that's leveled against Abercrombie, which was in the original First Law trilogy. There's not a whole lot of plot. It's really just about following the characters, and the characters themselves are what are moving the story forward. Best Served Cold has a plot. It's got great characters. It's got Abercrombie's signature style, all in a single book, and so you don't have to read 3,000 pages to get a wonderfully written fantasy story, which not too many books written in the modern age of fantasy can really say that. So if you are looking for a great standalone fantasy book, and you have not checked out Joe Abercrombie's standalone books, and specifically Best Served Cold, I would definitely suggest checking that out. Now, moving away from fantasy, sci-fi for my top 2 books here. And my top 2 books are books that I have talked about on this channel before. And they may surprise you because they surprised me in different ways. The first of the 2, so book number 2 in my top 10 list is Wild by Cheryl Strayed. And so Wild is a book that in my ranking of my summer reads, I listed as my number 1 book of the summer. It is a great story about a woman sort of coming to terms with who she is, overcoming adversity, discovering her identity. It's about renewal, rebirth, and it's just a beautifully written memoir that is about so much more than hiking the Pacific Coast Trail. I picked this book up on a complete whim at a used bookstore, and I wasn't expecting to get all that much out of it, but I absolutely adored this book. Again, hit me right in the feels. Not shy to say I cried once or twice while reading this as well, and really, really great. I'm not sure what else to say other than if you like memoir, if you like connecting with things emotionally, check out Wild. It might not be something that you think of at first glance, especially if you're one of the typical viewers of my channel. I know this is not the type of book that most of my viewers would read, but it connected with me, so it might connect with you as well. Which brings me to the number 1 book in my 2023 top 10, and this one surprised me, and the reason it surprised me is because I didn't think that I had read this book in 2023. This book has had such a huge impact on me, and it looms so large in my mind in terms of the best books I have ever read that I assumed that I read this much longer ago. But as it turns out, I just read this book at the beginning of this year. And the book that I'm talking about is, of course, none other than War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. And so the reason I'm so surprised by this is because I started reading War and Peace middle of 2022 and was kind of reading through it using sort of the chapter a day reading pace, where if you read a chapter a day of War and Peace, essentially in a year you've read the whole thing because each chapter is about 4 pages long. So 4 pages, and there's about 350, 360 chapters in there. 4 pages a day times 350 chapters, you get a year's worth of reading. You go through the entire 1,400 pages of War and Peace. And it's a very sort of approachable way of reading the book. That's how I started reading War and Peace. I started mid last year, like I said. I made it towards the end of 2022. I had to take a break from the book for a number of reasons that I'm not going to go into. I came back to it early in 2023, again with the idea of going back to this chapter a day, but I got so wrapped up in this story. I got so wrapped up in these characters, in the world that Tolstoy creates, which is sort of based in the real world, but almost feels more real than the real world, if you can say that I ended up blowing through the last 2/3 of War and Peace in a few weeks, and I was actually, and this is crazy to say, I was sad when this giant monster of a book ended. So if you are one of those people who has avoided reading War and Peace because it's too big, because there's too many characters, because you have no interest in sort of Russian history or, the lives of the Russian aristocracy, all I can say is give this book a chance. Yes, there are a lot of characters. Yes, it is long, but Tolstoy is such a phenomenal writer that he makes every aspect of this book interesting. You learn to love all of these characters. They become friends. They frustrate you. You fall in love with them. You hate some of them. But it is everything that literature should be, wrapped up in a tiny little 1,400 page package. It is an investment of your time, of your energy, but what you get out of this book is so, so worth it. And like I said, it has taken up so much of my mind space in terms of great books that I have read that I can't really believe that I actually just finished this book less than 12 months ago. But I did. And so really there was no question about what book would land in the number one spot of my top 10 for 2023. It is War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. And so if you haven't read it, check it out. If you have read it, reach out to me. I'd love to discuss it with you. And that brings me to the end of this video, because that is all 10 books that I'm putting into my 2023 top 10. Let me know what you thought of my list in the comments below. Let me know what your top 10 of 2023 were. And that is it for today. My next videos are going to be coming out over the next few weeks. We'll talk about, more recent reads. And at some point in the next few weeks, I'll also do a video sort of about the future direction of the channel, because I'm gonna be changing things up a little bit. And so if you're interested in that kind of stuff, subscribe and look out for that video, which will come out in a little while. Until then, I hope you got something useful out of today's video, and I hope you had an excellent 2023 reading year. And I wish you a fantastic reading year and a fantastic year in general for 2024 and beyond. So with that, cheers. See you in the next one.